Here's another study showing how David Gillespie cherry-picks research and ignores the bulk of it. Here we are in Big Fat Lies, looking at the section called polyunsaturated fats and cancer. He's just spoken about two studies about rats, and now we come to this 1996 study from the Karolinska Institute, using women 40 to 76, and basically here are the results. Consumption of monounsaturated fat reduced the risk of breast cancer by 20%, but polyunsaturated fat consumption did the opposite. Just as the rat studies had predicted, the women consuming the polyunsaturated fat were 20% more likely to develop breast cancer than women consuming the least. So there you are, we found a study that supports David's theory about polyunsaturated fat and breast cancer. Now let's go to the research and see what it says. The first thing we do is find out where this quote comes from. We go to the notes section and we find the study is a prospective study of association of monounsaturated fat and other types of fat with risk of breast cancer. We head on over to PubMed and post in the title of the article. And we hit search. Now, as you can see here, that's the name of the title of the paper. We also have something similar, which is a 2001 paper and another one there. So I might just open a new tab, the 2001 paper, because it's a pooled analysis, so it will give us a cross-section, but what we'll do is go to this paper here. We double-check the results, and they are basically what David says, but we also want to know what the bulk of the papers say. So you can look up here in related citations, or you can actually look at papers inside of this paper over here by clicking on See All. Now we have a bunch of studies come up. We'll look for ones that talk about fat and breast cancer. I'll look at that one. That's great. Three, six, dietary fat and breast cancer risk, Swedish women, perfect. Dietary fat and risk of breast cancer, just dietary fat for breast cancer. Dietary fat and breast cancer risk revisited in meta-analysis. And there you go. So we have a bunch of studies published since then, and we can now go through them and get an idea of how relevant and how indicative this paper was. So the first one was the one I clicked on that came up as a search. And what do we find when we look at it? You can read through all of the details there, but it's summarised pretty much in the end. These data are suggestive of only a weak positive association with substitution of saturated fat for carbohydrate consumption. None of the other types of fat examined were significantly associated with breast cancer risk. So there you go. We have no risk with the other types of fats. On to the second study. The second study concludes an adherence to a Mediterranean dietary pattern did not decrease breast cancer risk in this cohort of relatively young women. So we have young women here, unaffected by monounsaturates, which again goes against the Swedish study. New insights into the effect of the 2012 study, very, very recent, so probably not relevant to a search that would have been done back when Big Fat Lies was written, but still relevant today. Here's the first bit. The optimal dietary fat profile includes a low intake of both saturated and omega-6 fatty acids and a moderate intake of omega-3s. This profile is quite similar to the Mediterranean diet. On the other hand, recent studies have found a positive association between omega-6 and breast cancer. So this would be a good one to go in and check and follow up on those new references. Finally, a moderate intake of plant or marine omega-3 in the context of the traditional Mediterranean diet. Low saturated fat and omega-6 but high in the plant monounsaturated fats appears to be the best approach to reduce both the risk of cardiovascular disease and cancers, in particular breast cancer. So some points against omega-6 but saying it's as bad as saturated. The next paper, 2007. This is another Swedish study, but most importantly with a different age group of women. In summary, total fat, monounsaturated fat, polyunsaturated fat, or saturated fat were not associated with the risk overall. However, women in the highest mono and polyquintile intakes had a reduced risk of breast cancer. The reduced breast cancer risk after the age of 50. The final part, despite the negative findings type of fat during premenopausal years. The next study, dietary fat and risk of breast cancer. Summary of this paper, increased consumption of total fat and saturated fat were found to be positively associated with the development of breast cancer. Even though an equivocal association was observed for the consumption of total monounsaturated fats and the risk of breast cancer, there exists an inverse association with the case of oleic acid, the most abundant monounsaturated fatty acid. A moderate inverse association between consumption of omega-3 fatty acids and breast cancer risk, and a moderate positive association between omega-6 and breast cancer risk were observed. So again, mentioning a slight omega-6 increased risk, but the highest was saturated and total fat. Breast cancer research, 2004. Summary results from a prospective study do not support the concept that fat intake in middle life has a major relation to breast cancer risk. However, weight gain in middle life contributes substantially to breast cancer risk. And finally, the 2003 meta-analysis. It says combines estimates of risk for total and saturated fat intake and meat intake indicate an association between higher intakes and an increased risk of breast cancer. Case control. So once again, we see a lot of variety in the research, certainly not a slam dunk as indicated by David Gillespie, and some varying associations, no doubt depending on age. But as the research, and especially the summary suggests, there aren't too many very, very strong studies, and it's certainly not 100% for or against, typical of the way David does his research.